Well, good evening and welcome to this episode of Investigate Everything. It's been a while and I'm glad to be back to see you all. Different time, but I have a very special guest for a very special time. I wish the times weren't as dark as they are, but you know, it's always darkest before dawn, as they say. So today I'll be joined by Karys Rhea. I will read her bio, her amazing bio to you in a second, but before I go into that, I want to talk about why we're here. So never in my life did I think I'd see so much race-based hatred and kind of unbased hatred land on these shores of America. I've been to many conflict zones, as you all know. I am a disabled combat veteran, and I spent 11 years in active duty, but was always very what kept me going was knowing I could leave that war and come back home. Well, it seems now the war is upon us, and I'm not talking about the left this time. I'm talking about our own side, conservatives. Or if you're not a conservative, our own side, patriotic Americans who just want to live in peace, raise our families, you know, celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever else. And we can't seem to do that because there's been an infection in our society, both online and offline, of hatred. Now, tonight we'll be talking about some of this hatred that comes in the form of anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli sentiment, anti-Zionism, whatever you want to call it. But it's everywhere now, and it seems, to me, it seems inorganic in a lot of ways. I'm seeing a lot of the tropes thrown at me are the same ones thrown at me from people all over the country. I'm not saying this is the majority of Americans, but I am saying it's definitely increased. And it seems to have increased really since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, most likely by Tyler Robinson. We'll know when that court case comes out. But it did seem to start before that, and I'm sure our guest will have a lot more insight on that. But really, October 7th, I was surprised to see it just boil over. And I was surprised to see it coming from the left, from a lot of organizations that consider or call themselves Jewish. A lot of them with actual Jewish Americans in that, protesting for, well, they called it Free Palestine, but let's face the facts. If you're protesting for Palestine, you are protesting for Hamas, a terrorist organization that happens to be the government of that country at the time. Okay, so why are we talking about this tonight? Well, for a few reasons. I believe that everything that seems out of pattern is warfare. I believe it might be a different form of warfare, but this seems to be a war for our very minds and our very souls and how we view the world. And it seems to have tapped into that thing inside of us all that you know, we all grow up learning how to restrain. And that is that beast called rage, fueled by hatred. And it seems for a lot of people, mainly weak-minded people, when someone gave them the green light, we'll talk about who those someones are, to belt forth their hate at a certain group, they took it and ran. And to me, it reminds me of the difference between cooking a good steak dinner that will fill you up and make you feel good and whole and strong, and just takes a little more work to get it on your plate, or having a Snickers bar and wolfing it down and getting a sugar rush, and then you feel like crap for the rest of the day. Well, it seems like there's a lot of people that have bitten into this Snickers bar called hate and rage, and they make no sense. And the more you listen to them, the more you realize this is idiocy, but this is real hatred, and this is very dangerous. So why is it dangerous? We're going to talk about that, but let me give you my opinion on why it's dangerous. I think it's an intentional, I don't want to say psyop, I think that sounds cheesy, but it is a bit of a psychological operation or a marketing tool, if you will, to divide not only this country, which was already divided, but to divide the populist nationalist base. We have people fighting over pro-Israel, anti-Israel, and there's no in between. Because if you don't say anything, you must be pro-Israel, which is nothing wrong with that. But it does seem to be a weapon. I find it terrifying to see people I know, people I used to respect, throwing out the most pedestrian versions of what they think comes from the Torah, and a lot of times they're quoting some bastardized version of the Talmud, to justify their hatefulness. And look, for those of you doing it, you know who you are, and it never ever lasts for you. You lost already if you give into hatred, because you could probably already feel how you can't think logically. We just need to make sure that you figure that out sooner rather than later, and if you don't, to avoid you or repel you. So what we're going to talk about tonight is, what is this? Where is it coming from? What can be done about it? What should people do? And I also, time allowing, and if my guest is willing, I really want her to explain some things that I think a lot of people get wrong when they're trying to quote, for instance, what Zionism is, and different things about the Jewish religion. But this is not just an episode about Israel and the Jewish religion. This is also about America and our fellow Americans, and even those people that are throwing out this hate. I want you to come back out of that storm, because some of you used to seem to be good people. I don't know what's happened, but we'll get you there, and if not, we'll just wave goodbye. So with that kind of sloppy monologue, I would like to invite my guest. Actually, before I do, I need to read her her bio to you, so you know who we're talking about. Karys Rhea is an American political commentator and former producer at the Epoch Times and Newsmax, a writing fellow with the Middle East Forum, ambassador for Israel365 Action, rising leader at the Global Liberty Institute, and recording artist on Baste Distribution. She is currently writing a book about how right-wing identitarians is undermining President Trump's vision, fracturing the MAGA movement, and jeopardizing the soul of America. It will be out in 2026 on Wicked Sun Publishing. You can find Karys on X at, I'll put that below so I don't have to read it off to you. So without much further ado, and I hope I did her justice, I'm bringing Karys Rhea to the stage. Karys, welcome.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be here talking to you.
It's great to have you. I've wanted to get you on the show for a long time, since you first talked to my wife, Naomi Wolf.
Yes, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of your wife, and increasingly you, as I get to know you better.
Oh, thank you so much, and we're fans of you too. So tell us a little bit more about what you're working on now, and really how we came to find each other for this interview, and a little bit more about yourself, if you would.
Sure. Well, I usually start these conversations with the fact that I am a proud MAGA conservative. I am a Trump supporter. I largely believe in what I would call MAGA principles, though I know that Trump is a very transactional president, and sometimes it can be a little bit thick when we're trying to actually define what those principles are. But I see it very clearly, and I wasn't always this way. I grew up in a very progressive environment in the Bay Area, California, one of the wokest places, if not the wokest place in the country, and then spent 18 years in New York City. But in high school, I started to become more politically aware, and since then, it's been pretty obvious that in my soul that I've always identified as a conservative, as small government, constitution oriented, and a belief in faith and family and freedom as the guiding structures to create a flourishing society, and so I was very active in the political community through my work, at first doing Israel advocacy and fighting anti-Semitism, and then later switching into the broadcast news community and working as a producer for Newsmax and then Epoch Times, where I learned a lot about the health freedom movement and China, the CCP, and am also big supporters of groups like MAGA and generally what people like RFK Jr. are doing at HHS, and also our fight against the CCP and trying to get them out of our country from the top down and the bottom up, because they have literally bought certain entire municipalities, right? And are buying so much of our land and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of fights to be had that I support that are under the MAGA big tent. And that is why I was so caught off guard and profoundly disturbed when about 3 years ago, even before October 7th, I started to see a little bit of the same identity politics that I have been so repulsed by that have presented themselves on the left, creeping up on the right. The same kind of race or gender-based intersectional hierarchies in which you view the world in these sort of dynamic power structures where you have the people who are the most victimized and the people who are the oppressors, and the people who are most victimized are automatically the most entitled. All this kind of stuff that we've been against, the DEI stuff and the critical race theory stuff, right? And the postmodernism. And I saw it happening with some people that were claiming to be conservatives, embracing like a victimhood complex, embracing anti-Semitic tropes, embracing misogyny, basically becoming the very thing that the leftists have always framed, smeared all Republicans as, which when I stepped out of my little Bay Area bubble and actually started interacting with Republicans, I realized was a complete lie. And now we see this very, very strong identity-based informal movement that is creeping up under the banner of America First. And I believe that it is really in opposition to Trump's vision and to where the conservative movement has taken us to this day. And I think it could, if it keeps going and if it keeps spreading, then I think it could really cost us elections, because I believe in the American people, and I believe that if this faction gets so big, then conservatives won't, they will be demoralized by this. They won't want to associate with this type of Republican Party anymore, and that will be a gift to the Democrats.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've seen these same things you're talking about, and I found them alarming at first because I was very proud of MAGA when we were the underdogs in 2021, 2022. We were very proud of everyone's welcome here. And all of a sudden it started changing. I would say October 7th definitely signaled a lot of it, but I saw even more happening after President Trump won the election in November. And then all of a sudden, the first thing I noticed was these circles around the president from very high-end podcasters or very loud, well-known podcasters. And I was like, uh-oh, here we go. The class system is forming already. And then I started seeing things like white Christian nation, which really caught me off guard. I was like, okay, well, I don't... Heritage
American.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, my wife is Jewish. I'm not sure how that's going to work. And so then, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. And you're right. I think it's very alienating to a lot of people who have supported this movement and want to get to that nationalism, that populism, that sovereignty, that make America great again in the truest form. So with that said, when I started seeing that happening, it just kind of reminded me of like a bad movie about the rise of Hitler's Germany. I was like, what is happening here? So in your work, I would guess my first question for you would be, it seems like the majority of this, and stop me if I'm wrong because I know you're working on this research, but it seems like the majority of this is really focused on the much larger anti-establishment right. That's what the communists call it. What's the pattern you've seen, and where's it coming from? Because it doesn't seem real.
Sure.
Or it doesn't seem organic.
Right. I think there's a number of factors that are going on. I don't think there's one person or one group or one country that is controlling the strings here. I think there's been a number of factors that coalesce to arrive at this certain moment. For example, you had the pandemic, which turned a lot of us Americans towards conspiratorial thinking, because there was so many conspiracies that we were shamed for pointing out, which turned out to be true. Whether it was lab leak, COVID stuff, all the stuff about Trump and his impeachment, Ukraine, and his stuff, the Russiagate stuff and Hunter Biden, all this kind of stuff, right? And we were all shamed and called conspiracy theorists for believing in these things. And I think that when you orient yourself towards conspiratorial thinking, you inevitably will go down a very, very dark path. You have to always walk the line between understanding that there's a lot of things that are establishment consensus ideas that are probably not true. We don't know all of them. We never will know all of them. But that doesn't mean that every single thing that everybody believes that is mainstream is actually a conspiracy.
Right.
And I think that when you see the world through that lens, always across the board, you are bound to arrive at anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, is fundamentally a conspiracy theory. It's really hard, I think, for conservatives to understand this, but I think a lot of people imagine that the only way to manifest anti-Semitism is for somebody to say, I hate Jews. And in actuality, the basis for so many pogroms against Jews, massacres, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, forced conversions, exile, is actually conspiracies about Jews, whether the Jews poisoning the wells or being responsible for the plague or killing Jesus or being responsible for world wars. This is actually what has led to virtually all of the violence, the wide scale and industrial violence that we've seen against Jews throughout time. And so I think that that is one aspect of the pandemic time period that primed us to kind of slip into anti-Semitism. And so now you see all of the old, ancient, medieval, classic lies about Jews being resurrected. And for some so-called conservatives, it's fine to just outright say Jews. Many others will use the more palatable and appropriate term of Zionists, and just recycle the same lies, but replace the word Jews for Zionists. But it's all the same old stuff. There's nothing new under the sun. And I think, we can go through other factors. I think the pandemic is just one event in recent history that has primed us for the road that we're on right now in terms of anti-Semitism.
That's interesting that you say that, because you could see the cracks starting to form. For instance, when I would put out things about China, which I'm normally focused on, lab leak and everything else. And I started getting attacked by people that said, oh, you're just shilling for Pfizer for blaming China. And like you said earlier, there's lots of bad guys out there. But you mentioned something really interesting. And I think part of the problem, when you mentioned the thing about going back to medieval times and these things being resurrected, that is a real key thing I've noticed. And it seems to be that there is a lack of just historical knowledge of the world, at least in this area, where I hear things, I'm like, do you really believe that? What have you mentioned you saw this? What are some of these examples that you've seen resurrected? Because I think if people realize they're resurrecting something that's been used over and over again, I hope they have the intestinal fortitude to look themselves in the mirror and admit to themselves, I'm getting played here. What are some of those examples you've seen?
Well, you mentioned one right at the beginning. You were talking about the Talmud, right? We see a lot of these so-called Christian conservatives that are now trying to prove that Judaism is somehow a guttural or demonic or satanic religion that is by law required to actually persecute Christians. And what do they use as this proof? They pull what they believe are quotes from the Talmud, which is essentially part of the Hebrew Bible. And in actuality, what they are doing is they're not looking into the Talmud for these quotes. They're looking to past Christian polemicists usually,
Really?
or
Oh, wow.
Nazi literature. So this goes back, hundreds of years, and as recent as Nazi Germany, where you had polemicists or Nazis that were inventing quotes that actually did not exist in the Talmud. So a lot of these quotes that people will present, like online, for example, are not even real. Other times they will present a real quote, but they will act as if this is Jewish law and divorce it from its context without understanding what the Talmud is, which is actually just rabbinical commentary.
What is the Talmud?
So the Talmud is essentially rabbinical interpretation and discussion of the Torah, and what you see is you have rabbis throughout the course of history that are providing their commentary on Jewish theology and trying to interpret, how to apply Jewish teachings to our ethics or philosophy or our customs. And there's a lot of disagreement about that stuff in the Talmud. You can have one rabbi throwing out a crazy idea,
the culture.
and then there will be it's a culture of Judaism, and then there will be a whole bunch of other rabbis that are disagreeing and saying absolutely not. That is not how we should interpret this, right? There's also a lot of thought experiments in the Talmud. Right? Like, so there might be things that sound absurd if you divorce them from their context, but if you understand the thought experiments at play here, you're like, oh, I understand why you would bring that up, because you're testing ideas, right? So, there's just absolutely no evidence. There's no legitimacy to the claim that Judaism is in any way anti-Christian. It's just not true. Of course, there are probably Jews here and there in the world that themselves don't like Christians, just like there are Christians who don't like Jews and Muslims who don't like Jews and Christians who don't like Muslims. But in terms of Jewish teaching, Jewish law, that's just farcical, and it's a sinister claim.
Yeah, and it's extremely sinister because I was going to ask you, how something accepted into the Talmud how many years of commentaries? My wife's Jewish. I go to Chabad. I go to services. I don't really understand everything I'm hearing because a lot of it's in Hebrew, but she explained it, the way you did. But let me ask you this. One of the common ones I've seen, and viewer discretion is advised, and this was posted to me today, in retaliation for me defending Tim Pool, that goes to the absurdity of this type of racism. They said that they had this quote supposedly from the Talmud that said, the Virgin Mary was, an WHORE. I'm spelling it in case kids are watching because it's 5:30. But that, I'm sure you've heard that one before. Like, that's, people are putting this forth as that's what the Jewish religion
There's so many.
says.
I don't even pay attention to them. But if you want to, you can just put these quotes into ChatGPT and say, does this appear in the Talmud? And ChatGPT will tell you if it doesn't, if it does,
Smart.
or it doesn't. If it doesn't, they'll tell you where it originated, who was the first to say that it did. There's so many of these false quotes or just distorted quotes that people pick out of there.
Okay, so you mentioned that's helpful. I didn't even think of doing that.
And there's really wonderful people on Twitter. I think there's a guy named I don't even remember, Eisenberg. Anyway, he just spends his Twitter threads debunking false Talmud quotes. It's amazing.
You got to find us that link. I'm going to make sure everyone follows that person.
He's really fantastic. So if you just read his threads, he's a true, a Jewish ex-scholar, if you will, much more versed in theology than I am.
It's so for my experience in life in general was Actually, my godfather was somehow Jewish. I don't know how that happened, but and I'm Catholic.
Your godfather?
My godfather, yes.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe my mom had a crush on this guy. Who knows? But you never know. But all due respect, mom. But in my adult life, I learned Arabic, and I was around. I've been to almost every country in the Middle East for various lengths of time. But I've been around a lot of Muslims. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's even hard for me to say. I hear these things saying. They're kind of saying the same thing about Muslims that they're saying about the Jewish people. So, for instance,
who is
like the same people who are throwing out these tropes against.
What are they saying?
Well, it's like they, basically they all are murderers. They're all rapists or all this. And I know a lot of Muslims, and that's not true.
That's so interesting because I am not seeing that. I am seeing from a lot of these people, especially people like Tucker Carlson, or even the more militant or extreme versions like Nick Fuentes or like Angela Lucas Gage. All these people, what I am hearing is that we should team up with the Muslims against the Jews or the Zionists. That's what I'm hearing from the Tuckers and the Nick Fuentes.
I don't think Nick Fuentes said that. I can't imagine.
Oh yeah, I mean he even said it in a recent interview where he was saying, yeah, and I mean, look, he will say, yeah, we don't want the Muslims in our country, just like we don't want the Jews. So he'll say that too. But simultaneously, he'll say something like, look, the Muslims, what did he say? What did he say the other day? He'll list people, and he'll say, these people are the guardians of the new America First movement, and like 3 out of the 5 people he lists are Muslim.
Yeah, that's interesting. I got to see that. Wow, because he, I don't want to make an episode about Nick Fuentes, but you brought him up, and I want to. I want to kind of point out an observation I made is, I always see hatred as kind of like a gun, okay? And you could put different bullets in it, but it's still hatred, okay? Mm-hmm. And so I noticed the people like, there seems to be a core network of the bigger influencers, Candace Owens, Max Blumenthal, who somehow has infiltrated the MAGA movement on the Rumble side. He's a total radical Marxist mercenary. I don't even know what this guy is.
Right.
And they're actually platforming this guy as if he's MAGA. But I hear like they're all on, like, for instance, this whole Candace thing going on with everything that's happening. She had this whole crazy, not based on any evidence, notion that the Mossad had somehow been involved with the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
Which, as a career investigator and intelligence analyst, I like to start with, things like evidence. And then you see what kind of theories the evidence starts spelling out. You don't start with a theory and then try to fill it in, because you'll be able to solve your theory, but really you're just investigating your own mind at that point. So you'll find the evidence. So it's the first thing we learn is you don't start with a theory. But in the case of Nick Fuentes, they were all like cheering him on, especially the Kim Iverson thing was funny because she's like, what Nick Fuentes says, and then Nick Fuentes said, basically on one episode, look, it's getting out of hand with this whole Israel's responsible for everything. Yeah, it's getting a little ridiculous, sounding a little crazy. And he kind of laid it out in that way he does. And then the next episode I see of Kim Iverson, she's like, well, like she was just flabbergasted that he turned against Candace. But the reason I brought up the hate as a gun thing is because the moment you disagree with them, they just turn it towards you. And in this season we're in, they're throwing things like at me today, like they called me a Zionist.
You're like, so what's wrong with being a Zionist? I'm
a Zionist. I'm an Americanist. You're a Palestinianist. So, but the thing is,
no, sorry. Go ahead. Well, what you said really made me think of this ex post by somebody from maybe a month or two ago, and they were commenting on that video of Nick Fuentes. And they said, talking about how this was ridiculous and calling out Candace Owens or something like that. And they said, I can forgive Candace Owens for saying that the Jews killed Charlie Kirk. And I can forgive Candace Owens for saying that, I don't know, Stalin was secretly Jewish and Ataturk was secretly Jewish. And I can forgive Candace for going out of her mind, blah, 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 blah. And he listed a bunch of things. And he said, but I will never forgive Candace for making me like Nick Fuentes.
That seems to be the case. I mean, if he's doing this on purpose, the man's a genius.
Yeah, no, he's trying to moderate himself to get to score some political points.
Well, I think, I won't go too far into it. I think what we're seeing with Nick Fuentes, I mean, he's a young guy. And you go through a lot of changes, especially when you become popular or famous or successful. And you kind of start rethinking things you said just last week, and it's, I don't like to forgive anyone that says horrible things about any race, but or any gender for that matter. But I will say that if he starts contradicting himself or backing up things he said last week, I see that as a good sign. That means he's kind of rethinking what he said, in my opinion.
I would love that, except for the fact that he will contradict himself in the same conversation today. So he'll say, I'm not an anti-Semite.
Right.
I don't believe in anti-Semitism, but I do like Hitler.
Yeah.
Like he still says that in the same interview, right?
Yeah, so, honestly, I think he does that on purpose because it just trends every time he does it. It's horrible, but honestly, like, come on, like.
But this is his plan. He's talked about moderating himself and making his ideology more palatable for a wider audience, so that they can take power. The Groypers have been very outspoken about what needs to happen in order for them to actually find some sort of purchase in American culture. So if he's going to go on to Patrick Bet-David or Steven Crowder, he knows that he cannot get away with looking at the things that he said even just months ago, as recently as months ago, and saying, yeah, I believe that. He cannot get away with saying, yes, I believe in the death penalty for perfidious Jews or any minorities. Should I gain political power in America? He knows that that there's no appetite for that in America.
Yeah,
so he has to tamp down his views, which are the same views he's been saying which he's been spewing for years.
And he said that too with that very clip about come on guys, getting ridiculous. And he came out and said, he's like, look, I'm not saying this for you. I'm saying this for me, because if we're not taken seriously and these theories are ridiculous, then how can we move into, I'm paraphrasing, how can we move into power? We have to be taken seriously. That's why he wears a tie and combs his hair and, puts his best face on when he does video.
Right. And he said, he called Candace a low IQ anti-Semite. And he said, and this was as recently as just a couple months ago, and he said, the low anti-Q Semites are making us, the high IQ anti-Semites, look bad. And then he goes on Steven Crowder 2 months later and says, I'm not an anti-Semite, please.
Yeah, I know. But see, I think he understands that people are like, they have this aversion to even recent history. I mean, it's amazing.
Wow, we're so inundated, right? I mean, we can't, from one day to the next, we're just so overloaded with information that there's no recall anymore. The internet has just, our brains are not equipped. They're not developed enough to deal with the amount of information that we're processing. And that's why people like Tucker, any of these crazy people can get away on the right with just lying outright and saying outrageous things and then completely contradict themselves one day later. And they can get away with that because people don't have enough they don't have a long enough attention span to remember.
They don't. And, you know, there's a great book. I'll try to get you a copy, but it's by Michael Nels. He's a researcher from
Oh, he's
Germany.
fantastic.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about, the indoctrinated brain. And I think that has a lot to do with it, where essentially, in the most simplistic way I could say it, the short-term brain storage area, that's what deals with acute stress and danger. And so if a dog jumps out at you, you remember that for a short term, and then it gets flushed out of your memory.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the short term, according to his research, if the short term brain fills up too quickly, starts borrowing from the long term brain where your long term storage is.
Interesting.
And it rewrites your long term memory. So if you think about social media, and especially the last 4 years of social media, you know, a president threatening us behind a red backdrop like Hitler when Biden did his famous, you know, Philadelphia speech about getting vaccines, just horrible violence in the streets, an invasion of our country by illegal aliens, the normalizing of rape and pedophilia that we've seen just everywhere, the normalizing of putting gory images on social media. That's new in the last 5 years. And your brain basically starts overwriting who you are until all you are is the headline in front of you.
Oh, interesting.
And that's a dangerous place for a population to be, because then they're ripe for takeover. And in the state we're in now, I'm amazed no one's done a massive attack to just take over the United States, because I don't think half the people would even fight them at this point if they got their messaging right. You know what I mean?
I think that people like Tucker Carlson are trying to slowly build an army. I think they feel like a revolution is coming. And just like you said, actually, I was talking to my publisher right before we got on here, and he was we were talking about this, and he was saying in every revolution, the foot soldiers are the disaffected male virgins. And look at the people who are, and these people are the next generation. They are our political leaders, and these people, these Gen Z and these Zoomers, are clued in. They're online 24/7. They're not healthy. They're all addicted to porn, so they're not having real relationships or sex because they imagine that they're getting those needs met through porn, and then they're getting their emotional needs met through just Snapchat and text messages and everything like that. They're getting all the dopamine, but they're not getting the oxytocin, which is critical for appropriate development. And they are being raised in an economy where the system is completely stacked against them, and in a public school system that is woke and teaching them that they're toxic just because they were born a male and just because they were white. I mean, they're so shortchanged, and they are, and people like Tucker Carlson and the more extreme versions of Tucker Carlson, like Fuentes, are capitalizing on that shame and that rage and that loss of identity, and they're weaponizing it for their own purposes of their own revolutionary purposes of co-opting the America First agenda for their own purposes, which is a version of America that is essentially an authoritarian technocracy in a lot of ways.
Totally.
A socially conservative, centralized power, and even some are putting forth ideas like it should be a feudalist monarchy. I mean, these people on the right that claim to be conservative, that we would call the woke right or the identitarian right or the sectarian right, whatever you want to call it, they advocate for a post-constitutional America.
Really?
They absolutely, and some of them are outspoken about it, more extreme people, and some of them hide it. Some of them are more outspoken, and they'll say things like, "Our founding father, our Constitution is gay," as Milo Yiannopoulos will say, or "Our founding fathers didn't know what they were talking about," and they'll explicitly come out and they'll say the exact same things that we hear on the left. We have to tear it all down. We have to build it anew, right?
Right.
And then you have others that will kind of stealthily push these ideas that such as post-liberalism, right? Patrick Deneen or Adrian Vermeule, these philosophers or scholars, these Christian scholars who have gained so much purchase among Americans, but really what they are pushing is like I said, a post-constitutional version of America.
You know, you just brought up something I've been covering. So I've been covering what I call the Intern 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And are you familiar with the Intern? Okay. So
Absolutely.
For those that don't know, it was referred to as the Communist International. It was the way the communists during the Soviet era were trying to spread communism throughout the world. So messengers, if you will, influencers, for lack of a better term, that was the Intern. And the things you were just saying are the exact same things that this movement, if you will, called they call it MAGA communism, but it's the American Communist Party, which was just formed in 2024. That's the exact same messaging they're pushing. And they come out and they say, and the reason I brought up the anti-establishment Republicans, this Jackson Hinkle and Hazel Din, who are the founders of it, they come out and say it. They're like, we want them. Those are the ones we're focused on. We want the working class anti-establishment because they're ripe for, an ideological shift. They're ripe for.
You're saying they say we want them, as in we want them to be our foot soldiers and carry out our message.
That's the people they are
targeting. Yeah.
And they're actively targeting them. Right. So, for instance, Jackson Hinkle is constantly complimenting Kim Iverson, who's a popular kind of center. She calls herself center right. She's more center left, but her audience is big, and a big audience on Rumble. You know who the audience is, and so, but he's constantly she's great, and she's platforming all of these like next gen type Marxists. And their messaging, and it makes sense. They'd go after, MAGA because it is predominantly working class. I mean, historically, it's the perfect target. Mm-hmm. And but then there's others like Max Blumenthal, the son of Sidney Blumenthal, who actually Sidney Blumenthal is the guy, and that's Max's father, who coined the phrase "vast right-wing conspiracy." He was Hillary Clinton's senior advisor.
Yeah.
When I saw Max Blumenthal. And I see people like right-wing podcasters referring to Max Blumenthal as their source. And I'm like, do you have any idea who this guy is?
Right. Well, that's how you can distinguish a lot of who these people are that I believe are undermining the conservative movement. They're people that are cosplaying as America First, but they're actually teaming up with all of the enemies of conservatives. So whether that be proud self-declared leftists and socialists and communists, or UN globalists like Jeffrey Sachs, or or jihadists and jihadist sympathizers, right? There's Tucker's had quite a few of those on his show. These are groups of people that conservatives recognize do not share our values, and yet all of these sub-factions on the right now are actually closer to their vision of America than what conservatives have been saying their at least MAGA conservatives have been saying, which is absolutely not authoritarian. Right. It is not feudalistic. It is not technocratic. It is not monarchic. And yet that's what these people are pushing.
Yeah, and when you mentioned Tucker and and Nick as far as the revolution, I mean, for me, and I agree with you, they're definitely pushing that. I could see Nick Fuentes leading something. I just have trouble seeing Tucker Carlson leading anything. It seems for him, it seems more of a mercenary play, like he's getting paid to say it. Do you really think what do you think of him?
Well, certainly Fuentes is starting something. I believe he just recently formed a 501c4, so he's definitely getting into the mainstream political arena.
Yeah, and that's
in
a
terms of
political action
Tucker
committee, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the $1 million question is who's funding Tucker, right? And a lot of people
Right.
think it's Qatar or Russia. But
Ridiculous.
I've spoken to quite a few people that have been friends with Tucker for well over a decade, and all of them have told me that he was always weird about the Jews. He would always throw in weird
Really?
things about the Jews. And I didn't know about that. I was a big fan of Tucker during the pandemic. I loved his monologues,
Yeah.
but I never knew where he stood about on Israel or Judaism because he didn't speak about it on his show.
Mhm.
Likely because Fox is a very pro-Israel and pro-Jewish outlet, so he probably knew
Right.
he couldn't get away with it. So this might just be ideological for Tucker in terms of the anti-Semitic component. He might have always just had kind of a problem with the Jews, but he's also newly discovered his Christianity, and he's pushing a lot of the things that the left always would accuse Christians of doing, like push like replacement theology or integralism. And I always thought those were just
What's
boogeyman
integralism?
items that it's basically an entire view. I mean, it was really big among it was a Catholic thing. Like it was really Catholic integralism, and I'm not the person to really go into the details about this, but increasingly you've actually seen the evangelicals linked up with the Catholics over this kind of Christian and this Christian philosophy that is oriented towards politics, and it basically believes that Christianity should like inform all aspects in terms of politics, and it completely rejects the separation of church and state. Which I know people who reject it on good faith, and we can have good faith arguments about that. But there are people who reject it that are bad faith actors, and they are doing it because they actually want the centralization of Christianity through political power. And they want they want to, and like I said, this is post-constitutional, right? Because the First Amendment guarantees religious freedom. And in the integralist view of America, the government would actually be policing religion, and it would be favoring Christianity at the expense of other religions. And for me, and I just have to say, I just want to inform your audience that I think, as a conservative Jew, that Christians are our biggest allies. Like I'm still single, and I tell everybody I would much rather marry a Christian Zionist than a progressive Jew. Okay, but what these Christians are pushing, in my humble opinion, as an outsider, are so anathema to what I have heard the conservative Christians around me support. And so this does not seem, what they're pushing does not seem like the good faith Christianity. This seems angry. This does not seem compassionate. This does not seem tolerant. This seems a little bit barbaric, a little bit primeval, a little bit, like really kind of taking advantage of some of our worst instincts.
Well, Karys, you know what, the way you just described what it feels like is the same way these very same people describe their interpretation on Islam. And when you
say more about that.
Well, for instance, they're always saying it's backwards, it's barbaric, it's spread through hate and rage and anger and violence, and there's a lot of history to show that a lot of it is. But this is how these very same people you're talking about talk about Islam. And it's almost like, because they're not just attacking Judaism, they're attacking all religions that are not Christian, their version of Christianity, in their rhetoric. And the interesting part is, in the real world, like if you're up here in New England, where I'm at now, and you spew that stuff out at church, you get kicked out. You know, it's like, that's not, they'd be like, who let this redneck in here?
Right.
You know, get out. That was not, I grew up in Maine, and that was just, you know, no one cared really. It's just, you go to church, you go home, your friend's Jewish, your friends. I actually had a guy who taught me to hunt in Maine who was from the Middle East. His name was Al Khalil. I never even knew he was Arabic until later on when I learned Arabic. I was like, oh, hey, Al, the guy with the Maine accent. Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I've heard, I mean, it's almost like we're watching a weird new version of, you know, the rhetoric that was in the Crusades rising again, like the way the church was able to whip up people to go march down to the Middle East, and the way, you know, the leaders of Islam were able to whip people up to march and go fight. And, you know, a lot of people lost their land and lives and possessions, of course.
Yeah, you know, I think that this over-secularization of our society, the decadence, the progressive decadence that has taken hold of our institutions, has produced a backlash. And a lot of us want to return to our Judeo-Christian roots. We don't like that prayer isn't allowed in school. And we're happy with we need the government to be tolerant of all religions, but we don't need it to be neutral. It can say we are a proud Christian country. I'm a Jew, and I have no problem with living in a Christian, proud Christian majority country that is Christian in orientation. As long as I can be proudly Jewish, then that's fine. As long as I trust my government to protect my rights as a minority religion, then that's fine. But I think that has opened the door, that backlash, that to reactionary rhetoric, where people are no longer just okay with getting back to these Judeo-Christian roots. They actually want to assert some sort of Christian supremacy over the rest of over minorities and atheists and you know, even women in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I do, and it feels like revenge to me too. Like they're taking, it's coming in the form of this kind of like uninformed, you know, argument that you see online trying to sound religious. But to me, it sounds like it's almost like a class backlash, because let's face it, I mean, except for a few examples like Tucker, the people that are spouting the worst stuff don't really seem that intelligent to me. And again, there's examples of people that are very intelligent. They're usually the people leading the charge. But for the most part, the masses who are spewing this stuff, they don't strike me as particularly well-read or well-educated. So it does feel like a class backlash to me.
I honestly think that's the danger of populism. I mean, we all know that Trump is a populist leader, and we were all part of his movement. But I think, you know, there's something to be said for conservatives who in America who are very wary of populism, because usually there ends up being a very ugly strain of it that is created, and it's more often than not anti-Semitic, because populism.
Why is that?
Well, I think because, you know, populism is appealing directly to the people, and what that can turn into sometimes is mob mentality. Right? Is people walking around with torches.
Why the Jews? Why is it always the Jews as the target?
I mean, I think that since time immemorial, I think societies have always needed a scapegoat to blame for their problems, from as early as, you know, ancient Egypt to what we're seeing now today. Whether you're blaming the individual Jew or you're blaming Israel, the collective Jew. You need, you know, people need some way of rationalizing their own bad behavior and not taking personal responsibility. And if they can,
that's well said. That's well said.
If they can project their own shortcomings or project any sort of, you know, sinister explanation for the way things are onto the Jews, then that provides some level of comfort, and also some feeling of like, I figured it out. Like, you know, it's a very kind of tribal, like, I know the truth. It's like othering, like us versus them. It's very, you know, Machiavellian. There's also an argument to be had that from a faith-based perspective, you can argue that Jews brought a codified morality into the world through the Ten Commandments, right? And so people who have malintentions, or some people maybe would call them evil, would resent that because they're immoral. And so there's an argument to be made that essentially, to kind of dumb it down, bad people hate Jews because Jews represent Western morality, essentially. And they resent Jews for bringing that into the world and essentially laying the foundation then for Christianity and Islam. And so, there's a lot of theories. There's a lot of books, written why the Jews. But I think at the end of the day, we just have to accept that some people, just for whatever reason, they have embraced they embrace bigotry towards groups of people, whether it's Jews or Muslims or Christians or women or gay people, whatever it is. Right? Many times for immutable characteristics, many times for groups with that have characteristics that are out of their control, that they were just born with.
Well, and I think it also shows the dangers of censorship, because if you think about it, under Biden and during the pandemic, I mean, people are getting censored beyond belief, and something like it, and it's still happening in the UK worse every day. And it's almost like everyone was locked up in a cage, and then someone finally let them run free, figuratively, with what they want to say. And they're like, it's kind of like, have you ever seen, there's an old movie from the 80s called Summer School? And it's Mark Harmon, I think, was the guy, but he's a guy back then, but it was a funny kind of lampoonish type of comedy. And he was a substitute teacher that really didn't want to be in summer school. He was just trying to keep his job. So he'd let these high school kids do whatever they want. And so this one kid slipped. He said the F word, and he looks at him and he goes, "Yeah, I don't care." And the kids go crazy. They all start swearing and dropping F-bombs and S-bombs and everything. And then the little nerdy guy goes, "We can swear in here." He's like, "Damn it." Like that. But it felt like that, like when people just started going off. And I'm like, I mean, I saw, like, for instance, Stu Peters, using the word, faggot openly. And I'm like, first of all, it sounds really just kind of dumb, but it's gross. And I even told Naomi, I'm like, hey, you know what? Because she's interviewed on his show long ago. I said, I don't think you should go on that show anymore, because these things have a way. What's going to happen, in my opinion, and then I want to hear about your research, because I think it talks to the heart of our conversation. But I don't think people are thinking long term here. Like, racism is never okay. I can't think of any instance where racism is ever okay, unless unless you find a race that's 17 people and they all have switchblades and kill people. That'd be the only exception. That doesn't exist. But don't I wonder, like, these people are thinking that are throwing this out are not thinking long term, just like the the radical left didn't seem to be thinking of the consequences of what they were saying if it was outside the pale during the last 4 years. Well, what's happening now is all of these things, in my opinion, that people are throwing out there are the very things that the left or the Marxists, whoever, because I think the Democrats are pretty much getting hijacked by the socialists. These will be used to scare the center away from ever voting in our direction again. They're going to be like, look at this over here. You sure? Is this what you want to be? And they're, and the left is weirdly silent about it, except
they're just watching it all, eating popcorn.
Well, but they are elevating Nick Fuentes.
Right. They love it. It's a gift. We're giving them a gift. And I think it's really, I think what you said touches on your first question about what led us to this moment. And I said there's so many factors we can get into, and I listed the pandemic as one, but you just mentioned another one, which is this is a reactionary movement to the left, which Jordan Peterson actually warned about way back in the day when they were policing people's pronouns and all that kind of stuff and censoring free speech. And Jordan said, this is going to create an identitarian backlash on the right. When you have state censorship, when you have a state censorship apparatus and it's colluding with private companies and dictating to them what can and cannot be said based on ideology and not actually, any sort of a legal code like terrorism or violence, then of course you're going to have people that respond to the censorship with trying to say the edgiest, most extreme, outrageous things that you can possibly say. And if you're going to shut people up and you're going to say, no, you're racist and you're sexist, then there's going to be a reaction to that where a lot of people say, you know what, fine, I am going to be racist and I am going to be sexist. And that is what we're seeing right now.
Fuente said that on Piers Morgan the other day. He's like, so are you a racist? And he's like, yeah, you know what, I'm a racist. You would never have heard that, long ago. I think he was kind of tapping out of that argument, but still.
Because once again, it's like you said, it's anti-establishment. It's sexy to conservatives because we've been the underdog for so long and we are associated with that identity. Well, you know what? Now we're in power and we kind of don't like it because we kind of associate ourselves as being, kind of the cool hipster kids outside of the mainstream that have the secret knowledge and really know the truth. And so we want to push this edgelord stuff and this rage bait content online that will get us clicks and views because it is so extreme, and we're not cognizant of the actual implications of what we're seeing and the guttural nihilism that it places into a culture. And I think that, there's other factors too we can talk about how we got here, but I definitely think that I definitely think that we can blame the left for a lot of what's happening on the right today.
I would say the left, but I would also say, at some point we've got to blame ourselves for not picking up a book and saying, did that really happen?
Learning from history.
And I see a lot of that. I actually collect, old books, because as you know, the Chinese Communist Party in their society, they digitized everything. So they control history. But they also control case law, which is especially dangerous if you're doing business with them. But I hear everything you're saying, and it is dangerous because, I can see, we're not talking like down the line. We're talking could be 2026 where there could be a majority Democratic Congress, which is largely controlled, as we've seen after the Mondami election, by the Democratic Socialists of America. They have a lot of sway. That's the Squad. That was Jamal Bowman. That's Mondami, in charge of the biggest city and the most powerful city in the country. I could see them passing laws like counterterrorism laws or something based on the things that are being spewed out right now all across social media. All it takes is for them to twist one suicide or a couple suicides and then blame it on some posts they saw on Getter. And then we're there. And then, it might swing back, but that's, slowly that pendulum disintegrates the country. It's like a Sith for a pendulum. And I see that happening too. But I want to talk about...
I was just going to say, but the thing you were saying about hating Muslims is really interesting to me because as somebody who's studied counter-Islamism and worked in counterterrorism and these fields, what I see happening is that you have some of these people that are just, straight up neo-Nazis and hating any minority, whether that's Muslims or Jews or whatever. But like I said, I feel like for a lot of these other people, because there's a lot of informal sub-factions here, they're not unified, and a lot of them hate each other, right? Nick and Candace, whatever, right? And some of them are paleo-conservatives, and some of them are, Christian fundamentalists, and some of them are technocrats. But some of them, I feel like, are actually, they'll hate on the Indians, and they'll hate on the Jews, and they'll hate on women. But they're actually finding common cause with Islamist societies because of how conservative they are. So they'll look at a society that is so restrictive of women, right? Like you had Andrew Tate go on Tucker Carlson, and he'll say, the Taliban is great. They protect their women. They protect their women. And Tucker was like, yeah. And now Tucker's talking about how, like, you know, it's so great to be in Gulf countries. You go there and there's no rape. There's a rape rate of 0 in those countries.
Has Tate been to Afghanistan?
I'm sure he hasn't, but he converted to Islam, not Islamism.
It's not even an Arab-speaking country. It's totally different than the Gulf states.
Right. I know. It's Pashtun or something.
Dari.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that I think that there's a dangerous, I think on the one hand, some of these people are bigots towards anybody, but I also think that we should be aware that there is a new red-green alliance forming. The red-green alliance post 9/11 referred to the far left progressives hooking up with the liberal Muslims, like the Muslim Brotherhood types, and coming together not because they had anything in common, but because of their mutual hatred of the West and of America. And now we see a lot of these conservatives on the right that are doing the same thing, but it's now the red-green alliance, and it's red for Republicans, not red for communists.
And interesting way to look at it.
Now you see Islamists, a lot of Muslim Brotherhood Islamists, and also Shia Islamists, like Iranian regime pawns that are finding common cause with identitarians on the right, because the right respects how they keep their women in line, and how, you know, they've cracked down on their society to the point where apparently there's a rape rate of 0. Yeah, because if you report it, you'll get killed.
Yeah, of course. And it's, you know, it's interesting, but I have a theory on that too. First of all, I think a lot of people have really never been to the Middle East. I mean, it's in its entirety, because I think people forget the Middle East, as you know, is not, you know, a state, you know, that everyone's the same. It's like, you got Oman right on top of Yemen, and they're about as different as the United States is from, you know, Sri Lanka. You know, Oman's a very rich first world country.
Right. It's very different going to Qatar than if you go to Iraq.
Yeah. Like, look, I'll put it this way. Like, if you, for instance, if you spew this kind of hatred of anything in Saudi Arabia, where I've been, and, you know, as I don't know if you know this, but you can only go to Saudi Arabia on a business visa or work visa. So if you, as an American, but you go over there, you're not yelling at people on the street. I mean, they got the dudes. I was over at the Four Seasons for like a week because my client was a week late, and so that's where they put me. It could be worse, but I went to the giant mall they have there in Riyadh, and they got the dudes with the sticks, man, and they're whapping people on the shoulders and the head for like violating the morale codes. And it's
morality police.
It's an authority. And look, I'll tell you, these are, I wouldn't say they were angry people. I mean, everyone's pretty nice, but they were just so tense. And I realized after 3 days in Riyadh why they were tense. There's no outlets. Like, there's none. There's no, as a man, I'm not seeing a female body. You know what I mean? Not even a open-toed sandal. You know, there's no alcohol. All there is nicotine and caffeine. And, you know, I got bored, and it's like, all right, nicotine and caffeine. By day 3, I was ready to go kill someone. Like, I was losing my mind. I couldn't imagine. And it is a very, you know, it's beautiful, but it's like very oppressive. But then what would happen is when we flew to Dubai, as soon as we crossed that boundary line, you know, over that ocean line somewhere in the sea, and we're heading to Dubai, you see all the women take off their
that's so funny. You actually, so you saw people in like the full abaya and the burqas, and then when they got to Dubai, they just took them off, like at the airport?
While they're on the plane.
Wow, that is amazing.
They actually announce it while they're on the plane, and it just comes off. And
that is amazing. Because I've been to Dubai, not Riyadh, and it's bizarre because it's Dubai, it's an Arabic country, but yet you have all these people walking around in bikinis alongside people in the abayas, fully decked out like ninjas, and you're like, this is so bizarre. Yeah,
like most of the people in the abayas are probably tourists.
Really? From other Arabic countries.
Yeah. And they're probably with their husbands, because if they weren't with their husbands, they probably wouldn't be wearing them. And you see the same thing. Oman is the same way. It's like they're like the full, like the eye holes. And then you could go to like Indonesia, one of the most, I think, probably the most populous Muslim country in the world, and they're very relaxed about things. So the point is, it's like every single corner of the Islamic world is different from the other. And I belong to Frank Gaffney's new, group where we're trying to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, and we were talking about that. And I said, look, these leaders who are pushing the anti-Sharia laws, which I totally agree with. I don't know why we have to push any bill to ban a new system of law in our government. That makes no sense to me. But I told them, I said, they really better be careful when they refer to Sharia law that they don't specify certain factions of it that they disagree with, because it's all different per region. Like, they're not burying girls up to their neck in Oman and Dubai and stoning them.
But I still think, but you can still say, Brian, that like Arabic Muslim culture is a lot more similar, right? Like, the UAE is a lot more similar to Saudi Arabia as Indonesia is to Saudi Arabia, right? Because one is an Arabic Muslim society, and one is not Arabic. One is South Asian.
I think at the level of UAE and Dubai, you're kind of in a globalist type of mentality where like
That's true. Those are probably bad examples.
Yeah, they mesh really well with like Singapore and Japan.
That's true. But I mean, at least like, yes, I think the countries, obviously we can distinguish each state has its own policies and its own laws, but like Arabic culture, I mean, and isn't this your experience having traveled throughout? Like, there is a unifying Arabic culture
for the most part. But it depends where you are. So for instance, the more poor a country is, the more harsh the adherence to Islamists. So I actually, what was interesting, my first experience with Arabic culture was.
But what about Qatar? Qatar is like the richest country in the world.
Again, it's kind of okay. You know what these places remind me of? Qatar, Abu Dhabi, which I've been to probably the most of those Emirati countries, Dubai. They remind me of beached, like celebrity cruise line ships. Like, I always feel like I'm in some sort of a vacation platform.
Right.
It's very, very rich.
Right.
It's very business oriented. That's the key thing. That's what I said earlier. So
but what I was saying Qatar has very strict adherence laws to Islam. Like, obviously people are going to come in suits and everything, and they'll try to accommodate the Westerners. But
I'll put it this way: like, what you see publicly is not what you see privately. So, for instance, the richer the person you're hanging out with, the more likely it is that you're probably going to have a nice, single malt scotch when you get back to, their, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like the Democrats during the pandemic. It's like we're all locked down, but Pelosi's getting her ice cream in her deep freezer.
Understood.
So with a lot of very wealthy Muslims, they're partaking in whatever the hell they want to partake in.
Right.
Even if it goes against a religion. And let's not forget, like, Saudi Arabia was not that orthodox until like the 70s, when one of the princes shot up. Yeah, they shot up the Grand Mosque because it was all drunk, and the king finally said, enough of this, and that's when it really locked down. It hasn't always been that way. It was kind of like, the way Judaism is. Kind of like, okay, you do you, I'll do me. We're going to practice our Chabad over here. You do it your way. I've been to a couple different places, and it's always different when I go, based on the culture. But it's kind of like that. But I think what I'm getting at is, what I'm noticing is the brand of Arab Muslim that we're seeing flood into Europe and the UK and the US for that part. I mean, these aren't the best and the brightest. These are the like lower working class that we're seeing. And that's what I'm noticing a lot. Like, these are the people when I would go to the Middle East, like, these are the people setting up the concertina wire for the joint military exercise. These are the people doing the drainage ditches and stuff. So, I'm not seeing radical Muslims in suits with PhDs running around. Yes, there's lots, but you know what I mean. Like, I'm seeing like it's this flood of like a lower working class type of unpolished type of human being that every country has. Just kind of like when this country was first, we were bringing people over to America to settle it. There's a really good book called White Trash.
Right.
And, in England, they weren't sending over like the doctors and lawyers at first. They were sending like the people they found on the street.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, but I feel like unlike other Muslim cultures, like maybe if you look, if you have a flood of Kazakhstani Muslims coming into America, it's not going to matter that they're Muslim. They're not going to try to impose some sort of way of life onto us. But if you have a flood of Arabic Muslims coming into America, just like you have throughout Europe, they're bringing their institutionalized beliefs with them. And what are those institutionalized beliefs? Well, one of them is Jew hatred, because Arabic culture from the top down, from the state down, it's starting to be reformed in places like Saudi Arabia and Abraham Accord countries, which is great. But Jew hatred is institutionalized throughout Arabic Muslim societies, in the schools, in the mosques, in the media, in the state. I mean, these people are raised with Mein Kampf and the Protocols and the Elders of Zion, which are still displayed in bookstores. And Hitler is glorified throughout much of the so, my problem with, to me, the problem with Muslims in America and Europe, it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they're Muslims. It has to do with the fact that they come from a tribalistic culture that raises them on beliefs that they don't have a chance at rejecting, because it's coming at them from all sides.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And but I'll say a few things about that too. Look what happens in this country when we favor a certain group and we take off all of their guardrails. It doesn't matter who they are; they go crazy. And
like what?
Like Black Lives Matter, for instance.
Okay.
Or like the Venezuelans in Chicago when they were flooding in up there and they could never get prosecuted. Like illegal aliens in New York. Like, they're doing heinous things because they know they're not going to get punished. And so...
that's what you mean by guardrails, right?
Yeah. So when you take the guard, and you're basically making them like supranational citizens. Like, they actually have more rights than the citizens that are here, and they're acting with a sense of impunity. And it's indicative of the majority of them, I'm very confident in saying, are very uncultured and not very well educated, because I'm an educated man. I went to the Army to get my education. I went to college while I was in the Army, so I'm a self-made man. But I could do anything I wanted for the most part in special forces. It's small units, it's big boy rules, as they say. But I wasn't, because I knew that's just not what a civilized person does. But what I'm saying, what you said about them bringing their religion and all that, yes, but for it to work, let's say the plan is to bludgeon out Western culture, and I believe it is. They can't do that without a leadership infrastructure already in place here. Look what happened in every war when they couldn't decide who was in charge of the armies between Jordan, Egypt, Syria. They got decimated. This was always a problem when I was training Arab soldiers, is there was a bit of a kind of a socialist mindset there, where there are commanders, but they're not as in charge as like our guys were of their troops. You see, it was more, and that reflects Islam. Islam really has no real central leadership, like the Catholic Church does. There's no hard echelons like that. You're saying, and I agree with you, but I really see, I brought up the Muslim Brotherhood because that's kind of how I see the Muslim Brotherhood, is that kind of infrastructure that's been slipping into place here, buying land, establishing communities.
Right, and they set up all these Muslim organizations that claim to speak for Muslims, and these are literally like the biggest Muslim organizations that we have in the country are all Islamist, and most of them are Muslim Brotherhood, or if not like Deobandi or some sort of other fundamentalist sect. And it's like they don't give the moderate Muslims a chance. Like they pretend to be the mainstream Muslims, and they are the Islamists. And so it's like because the Islamist groups have done what they're good at, which is intimidating any sort of moderate Muslim into silence with threats of violence or censure or exile, right from families and stuff. And so they have essentially infiltrated America, and they've set up these 501c3s, and we turn to them to get the mainstream Muslim opinion, and yet we know that the people who founded these organizations, whether CARE or the there's so many of them, the Muslim American Society or Students for Justice in Palestine, whatever, that they're actually Muslim Brotherhood fronts, many of them.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something controversial, so just don't lose your business on me until I finish. But I was just, I saw some of these posts the other day, and I said, I forgot who posted something about one of these anti-establishment people. But I said, do you know? I said that the Gray Zone is actually, funded or fiscally hosted by AIPAC. And they lost.
Oh, you said AIPAC?
I did. And
what did they do?
Do you know why?
No, I thought. Wait. Well, were you not making a joke? Are you serious?
Yeah, but let me explain it. That's why I gave you the forewarning here.
Okay. I mean, that's just a really funny thing to say.
I was going to save this and break it, but I might as well do it now. That's fine. It is the. There we go. So basically, there is a 501(c)(3), okay, and its acronym is AIPAC. And
but it's not the AIPAC that we all know.
So it is these
so
guys
here. Technically
my
true.
computer. So I said that, but I was like, I'm not lying, and I just find it ironic that so this is the. And I think I may have sent this to you, but this is the fiscal sponsor for Max Blumenthal's Gray Zone, which so many of these conservatives are listening to him. If only they knew. Well, they're about to. I was going to save this, but and by the way, when you have to go, you have to go. I understand. I don't have a limit on my show. Here we go. So this is it here. It's coming up. I can't wait to get it. There it is.
AIPAC.
So this is the
what do you know?
All right. So Association for Investment in Popular Action Committees. So I'll just read it really quickly. They basically act as fiscal sponsors for a lot of kind of like these kind of I don't even like calling them far left. I like calling them kind of like these are all like red green type things here. So it's like the No Tax Dollars to Israel, 14 Friends of Palestine, the Barbara J. Raskin Scholarship Fund, Global March to Jerusalem. These are the people that hosted the original flotillas, the Freedom Flotillas. And then if you see here's the current people: Palestinian Children's Welfare Fund, Good Shepherd Collective. Anytime I see good in either anything the Chinese or the extremist Muslims are pushing, it means bad.
Yeah.
So
or usually
Free Palestine
if you see like human rights
Syria.
in the title, they're not actually for human rights.
Well, it's like, if you look at like Chinese media, they're like, oh, he showed joy when this good person did the good thing of walking the lady across the street. Yeah, he saw joy in not watching his social credit score drop. But, those kind of things. But, Free Palestine movement, Syria support movement, Syria support movement. And this is where a lot of the people that we're hearing, Kim Iverson, Jimmy Dore, the list goes on. A lot of their messaging is coming out of people associated with the Syria support movement. This is a pro-Assad group. Okay, these are also the same group that are October 7th deniers. Syria Support Movement owns the Serena Shim Award for Integrity in Journalism, named after an Iranian reporter for Press TV. This is the award that was given to Kim Iverson, Jimmy Dore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Max
So
Blumenthal.
you see, but
talk about
all of these
funding.
groups, they all promote the same things. Yeah. Well, this is actually based in it's actually based in San Francisco or in Northern California. But they're affiliated mainly with Turks.
But the Syrian group
Syrians
that gave
big time.
the award, that's a Syrian. That's based in Syria. Yeah. Okay.
No. The funny thing about this, see, this is the shell game. Like, it's really the same thing. So this is the Syria Support Movement. Okay. And if you go to the, I always start down here. You'll find that it's, or if you go just, I'm not going to do it now because my computer will glitch out, but basically, still there. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I'm gonna kill the other screen because it's really messing up. I need a new processor. Can you hear me?
Yeah, totally.
Still there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Go through, and I urge, yeah, I can hear you. I urge everyone to go through these. I'll put the link in the description. Go through these sites that are listed for this this thing, because you'll find the same exact messaging that's coming out from the Candace crowd and from the the crowds around them. It's the same messaging. What they don't realize is they're parroting the same. They're being fed the same messaging that is being said and parroted by the DSA people, the Free Palestine movement, the ceasefire movement. So as I see this, and I'm going to give you your interview back in a second, but you got me going.
That's fine.
If you look at it, it's like on the left, there's a takeover by socialists, Marxists, whatever you want to call them. That's happening through the Democratic Socialists of America. And you're watching Democrats, traditional Democrats, call them far left, whatever. They were never real Marxists. They were more like champagne socialists. They did it because it's good branding for them.
Socialists who, play the stock market.
Yeah, exactly, and buy a ton of homes. But they're being infiltrated by the DSA, and the DSA is taking a lot of power really quickly. And then on the right, what I see is it's kind of like the Jackson Hinkles, Hazeldin, these people getting their message in there very subtly. And I was curious about this, so I went back and I read a lot of the history from the diaries of Lenin and a lot of the Soviet leaders. And in their victory speeches, they actually detail this very same strategy, where they would say it takes just a small number of communists to latch onto a pre-existing political structure, take it over and steer it towards prominency. And then it doesn't matter which president we run because they're both communists. And where the Muslims come in is, I've always seen that, and historically there's been other red-green alliances, and the Muslims have always been used as the club, and then they get sucked into conformity as well. So, but tell us, I know it's getting late, I won't keep you too long, and I'm sorry I rambled on, but you got
me. Oh, that's okay. No, I'd rather it be an informal discussion than a formal interview.
It's always informal here at Investigate Everything. So I wanted you to talk, I find your what you're working on really interesting, and that's why we had this interview, because I, in a roundabout way, I've started noticing the patterns you're already researching. Can you tell us about your book that you're working on, and really maybe 3 or 4 high points that I think the public should know that you think might help them identify the dangers in front of them?
Ooh, that's a really good, that's a thinker there. Okay, well, the book will be out next year at some point. I just, I'm not going to make the first deadline for a manuscript, because there's just so much to explore here. And the problem with this topic, which is the rise of identity politics on the right and anti-Semitism and all the things that goes with it, the rise of radicalism, essentially sectarianism, is that this is an ever-evolving story, and there is a new development that shakes things up every single week, right? The other week you had Marjorie Taylor Greene leaving Congress and the whole rift with Trump, and before that you had the shakeup at OAN with Matt Gaetz and his producer who posted a whole bunch of anti-Semitic content and then got fired. I mean, it's hard to know where to stop following and tracking and researching and actually start writing. So, I'm using this book as a warning and a call to action directed at conservatives, and more specifically pro-Trump conservatives, that we are having a very radical wing that is claiming to be part of our camp, that is looking ahead to a post-Trump world. And we must not make the same mistakes that the left did when they embraced their radicals. And at the beginning, it was just a few squad members. And before you know it, like you said, the Democratic Party had become cooked, just largely a socialist. Even any modern Democrats that exist essentially function at the behest of the extremists. Because also, like you just said, we don't need that many of them. You only need 10% of a population to start a revolution. So you don't need that many people to take over a party. And I'm very worried that this could cost us elections if we don't actually start gatekeeping, which conservatives have always done because we are principled, and start asserting our red lines and say, this is what we stand for and this is what we don't stand for. And we can disagree on specific issues. We can talk about different approaches to immigration or different thoughts on abortion or interpretations of the Constitution, but we're not going to invite in different values, fundamentally different worldviews. If you have a socialist worldview, then you're not a conservative, period.
Right. You're not an American.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's for sure. So, in the research of the book, I've just been tracking a lot of this stuff. I've been trying to answer questions that I have about funding, about what these people believe, their philosophies, how big is this? Is it just an online phenomenon? So I've been trying to answer those types of questions. I've been in my head, and now on paper, I've started creating somewhat of a map of what I call the identitarian right, which is very difficult to do because a lot of these people and these organizations overlap with a lot of really fantastic conservative organizations doing good things, or donors, or somebody like Peter Thiel, who funds incredible conservative initiatives and has done a lot for our movement and for Trump. But on the other hand, he's funding a lot of really, really dangerous stuff, which I don't even know if he knows that he's funding it, right? So there's people that it's not necessarily just good or bad, right? Good people and bad people. So I'm trying to figure that all out and understand the doctrines and the philosophies that are being pushed within the identitarian right-wing spaces. And
how do you describe an identitarian?
So an identitarian is somebody who adheres to a political and cultural system of identity politics, or a cultural system of identity politics, which means that you see the world in terms of a hierarchy of power. And within that hierarchy, you place different people as having more or less power, or deserving of more or less power, based on identity characteristics. So based on their religion or their race or their gender or their class. And you assign people a place on the hierarchy based on not individualistic circumstances, right? But actually on group identity categories. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
you would say,
it does.
So according to the left, for example, the left's identity politics is based on a hierarchy that says, all the black people or the trans women are the most oppressed as a group, and the white Christian males are the least oppressed and the most powerful, and therefore everybody who is black or everybody who is trans is entitled to actually have more rights, and in order to displace what they believe are the white Christian males who they think traditionally have had the power.
Right.
So it's a sectarian way of looking at it, because you are dividing the world into categories, and not looking at each situation on its own merits, each person in their own idiosyncrasism. Or sorry, I'm trying to use.
I get you, and I'm seeing the same thing is happening with all the people we just talked about.
Right. Yeah. So it's just the simplest way is it's a system of looking at the world through group identities.
And you don't have to go. I've seen the list, and I'm looking forward to when it comes out and seeing the drafts along the way. Hopefully, if you'll let me. So what if people? This is a tough one. I'm not going to hit you with this one. If people could do one thing differently tomorrow, academically, in their day-to-day stuff, or on Twitter, let's just say that. My recommendation to them is just like your suggestion, just put it in ChatGPT and check it. What advice would you give them?
Sometimes. I mean, I would say sign up for my mailing list.
That's good. That's fair.
You can send me a DM on X. No, I mean, I think that people should. I think that people should determine what their values are. If they are conservatives, if they are liberals, if they are centrists, I think that they should look inward and determine not just where they stand on specific political issues, but what are their values, their political and cultural values? What do they believe contributes to a flourishing society? And then if they're listening to people in their own camp, if they're leftists and they're listening to fellow leftists, or if they are conservative, see if those people are really saying what matches up with your values, right?
Smart.
And I mean, if Tucker Carlson is having on, Jeffrey Sachs, but Jeffrey Sachs is a UN globalist who works for the Sustainability Development Fund and goes on Chinese state TV as a regular propagandist to bash America.
Yes. Yeah.
Then ask yourself, is Tucker Carlson really an America-loving patriot? If he has this person on his show over and over again, and he's constantly fawning over them and talking about how amazing they are, and yet all this person does is characterize America as some imperialistic, sinful nation that is the cause of all the problems in the world, then do we really still believe that Tucker Carlson is a conservative?
Yeah. This is good advice. I mean, all around. I like I don't think a lot of people have identified what their values are. They forgot them as their short-term memory wipes out their long-term memory. But I do feel like there's a storm right now and people have forgotten who they are. So it almost sounds like your advice for those who have values is remember who you are. And if not, figure out who you are.
Yeah.
Maybe you align with those values. Be my guest. Leave, please. But
the pandemic, the pandemic created a new political axis. We all get that, right? We had disaffected liberals that suddenly became MAGA conservatives, and then you had establishment Republicans and never Trumpers like Liz Cheney who teamed up with the progressives, right? And you had this whole new political axis. Well, the same thing is happening now. The political axis is getting realigned again, except what is happening is a lot of these conservatives that we thought were MAGA conservatives, for whatever reason, they have flipped, they have altered their philosophies, but they're still pretending to be conservatives, and they are hooking up with all of our enemies. And so there's a whole weird power dynamic going on there, and who knows what the future holds.
Yeah, that's true. And honestly, I think the Kennedy camp brought in a lot of that too. I mean, people don't pay a lot of attention to Maha, but a lot of people, like the guy that cursed me out and called me a Zionist, and I said, well, thank you.
I mean, look, I think that
he was a Kennedy supporter and DeSantis before then.
Oh, that's interesting. DeSantis.
Yeah, I'm finding
interesting.
A lot of people that went to Kennedy started as DeSantis if they were Sanders, right?
I haven't heard that. Wow.
And then
why do you think that is? Because I like DeSantis and I like Kennedy.
they're never Trumpers, so it's DeSantis
Oh, I
fell out, so
see. Oh,
they're not
I
going to
see.
get behind. They're not going to get behind
I
Trump.
see.
So that's why when Kennedy joined the team, so to speak, there was a bunch of people running around like ants when you lift up a rock, like they didn't know what to do.
Right.
But
Yeah,
what I
there's
am
definitely
finding,
some conspiratorial anti-Semites that have always been lurking in the MAHA health freedom movement. I mean, really pushing vile stuff against Jews. And October 7th was a big wake-up call for me, and I know some other people, probably Naomi, and I know people like proud Jews and Zionists like Dr. Harvey Reish, right? Or even Christian Zionists like Justin Hart. After October 7th, there was a schism within the health freedom movement where suddenly we realized, hey, we're not all on the same side. Some of us brought in some very conspiratorial beliefs about Jews running the world and Zionists controlling the media and controlling our foreign policy. And I'm not on that side. I know where that stuff comes from. Before it was the Israel lobby, I know that you're just tweaking the language.
Sure. And a lot of them slip to Jewish, and, it is interesting that you brought that up because, a lot of them on the Kennedy camp were Democrats.
Yeah.
Who followed Kennedy.
Yeah.
And they're very, very smart. They're using the MAHA Inc. There's actual MAHA Inc. Did you know that? They've actually filed a MAHA Inc. It seems like a real conflict of interest, but they're just setting up his run for 2028. That's what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I go to MAHA events. I was just at one 2 nights ago.
Yep.
This is one of the reasons why I have so much respect for Bobby, is because he is such a Zionist. He is a proud Zionist, and he is so pro-Israel. And there has been such a dedicated campaign of Kennedy followers that have tried to make him disown his pro-Israel beliefs and have put a lot of pressure on him, and he has refused to do so no matter what.
Yeah, and I got to give him credit because I've seen not that particular pressure, but I've met him a couple of times out in Palo Alto and everything for, a bunch of us had dinner and everything. But I got to spend a decent amount of time with him one-on-one, and he just doesn't get a minute back then to himself without someone telling him, come here, you got to do this. No, don't do that. Fights breaking out around him, about his opinions on things. Yeah. A super nice guy. And I did tell him, I said, you seem like a guy that could use a weekend of guns, fishing, and ATVs. So you're always welcome. And we still, my only interaction with him now is a St. Patrick's Day message every year. But the thing is, you're right. He's always, and he does seem like, he does seem like a guy in a storm in a small boat because it's all around him. And HHS is where the power is.
And a lot of the health freedom people are vying for Massey. They think Massey's their savior and they want him to run to president. And it's like, I agree with the health freedom agenda. I know that Massey's been great on it, but I don't care if every single political issue, if you actually come at me with medieval blood libels about Jews or Israelis or Zionists controlling our media and manipulating our foreign policy and leading us into wars, and then you don't have my vote. I'm sorry. Like that is just guttural. That is just guttural bigotry. And any society in history that has embraced those sorts of ideas as state-sanctioned policy has collapsed.
Yeah, and they're not representing America. They're representing their beliefs and trying to push them on the entire nation. That's, as we saw with Hitler, that's inherently dangerous, catastrophically dangerous. So I'm with you on that.
And people say, oh no, Massey he's just critical of AIPAC. Nonsense. AIPAC is the only lobby that Massey talks about. He does not talk about the Qatar Foundation. He does not talk about Confucius Institutes. He does not talk about NIAC, the Iranian lobby. And if you look at the amount of money that these lobbies spend,
They're huge.
they all spend more than AIPAC does every year. Not
I
to
don't think
mention that
AIPAC's even in the top 10.
not to mention that AIPAC isn't even foreign. So he's lying.
Yeah.
AIPAC, unlike NIAC or like the Confucius Institutes,
Mhm.
AIPAC doesn't do the government. AIPAC is actually much more liberal than the current Israeli government. And that's why there's been frequent kind of skirmishes with them in the past, even as recently as like a year or two ago when AIPAC was calling out Netanyahu because they were angry about Smotrich and Ben Gvir and some of the more
Yeah.
right-wing people that Netanyahu put in his cabinet. So they're not really friends.
Yeah, exactly.
AIPAC is just Jewish Americans that support a strong relationship between Israel and America, and it's not so different with other lobbies. The Armenian community of blah blah blah, or the Nigerian whatever. They lobby Congress
or the Chevron lobby that lobbies for Maduro pretty much.
Oh, are they? But what I'm saying is that it's not unusual to have Jewish Americans advocate for a strong America and a strong Israel. It's not unusual for other groups of people. People come to this country, or they're born in this country, but they have, ancestry in another country, and they're proud Americans. But they also want to. They also want America to be aware of their ancestral their ancestral homelands, and so they lobby to Congress members so that the Congress members can become aware of what's happening in Haiti or what's happening in whatever, and they can make sure that the ties that they have to those countries are still being supported because they believe that it's in America's interest as proud Americans.
Well, and it's also a lot of lobbying.
The problem
is
is not the problem is that's a great point. But the last thing I was just going to say is the problem is when you're lobbying on behalf of America's enemies. The problem is not when you're lobbying on behalf of America's allies, because that contributes to a strong America. But if you're lobbying for our enemies, if you're lobbying for North Korea, for Maduro, for Venezuela, for Cuba, for China, Russia, Iran, then you are not working in America's interests. So Massey is just pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. They use this ridiculous smokescreen, like, oh, he's just anti-Israel, he's just criticizing lobbying. No, he singles out one lobby that isn't even foreign, that's from an allied country, not an enemy country, above all the other lobbies, foreign lobbies in America. And that's the only one that he complains about.
And look, you want to see who has the power in DC, just go look at the embassies. Compare the Haitian. The size and quality. It's always the size and quality. I used to live down on Rittenhouse Street in Northwest, and I had the Bulgarian embassy was 4 doors down, the embassy house. But like, if you look at the different embassies in DC, the poorer the country, the crappier the embassy. And you see the Saudi embassy is massive. And not only that, you know where one of the Saudi houses is, like one of the more royal Saudi houses? It's going to blow your mind. Over on 123, maybe about a half a mile from the CIA's front gate.
Of course. I'm not surprised. Sometimes I hear that stuff. It's like, but Saudi Arabia is an allied country now. They're making reforms. They weren't in the 90s. Saudi Arabia is really good now.
They've been a good ally.
They've been a really good ally for the past decade, really.
Yeah, and that's what
since MBS came to power and basically cracking down on terrorism, designated the Muslim Brotherhood, and committed to modernity and being a friend of the West, and investing in infrastructure and the Saudi economy and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the thing is, it's kind of like what I like about the way Trump handles his business. He knows damn well that he's not an idealist. He's a business guy, where it's like, okay, well, these countries are looking out for themselves. I get that. I'm transactional too, so I can do business with these guys. Probably not for this next project. I'll do business with these guys because these guys will have a problem with these guys. And I wish the MAGA and even MAHA movements would look at this in politics and say, hey, you know what? Kim Iverson, Max Blumenthal, they were great during the vaccine mandate, stop the mandates. They're on our side, but people confuse like temporary partnerships and temporary allies, because all
Right.
allies are
Well,
temporary.
this is what I'm saying about values versus political issues, right? I
Mhm.
agree with Glenn Greenwald on a lot of issues,
That's
but
perfect.
we
Yeah.
have totally different visions for America. And he's a
Right.
Chomsky acolyte, and he is a proud leftist. I mean, he pretends to not. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard because these people will cosplay as other things, and you don't really know what to believe. So
Yeah.
you remain discerning and try to connect the dots like you're
I
doing.
will say this though, what really I'd give this advice if people have the time, and not everyone does. That's why I do such long podcasts. But like for instance, I started with Kim Iverson. I'm moving on to I've got 5 Jeffrey Sachs on that list.
Good, good.
But what I did
Man,
is I
he
spotted him
hates
long.
America. There's like nobody who hates America more than Jeffrey
Oh
Sachs.
my God!
I
Well,
swear to God.
he does, right? He does. Like they just constantly put it down, and they're laughing about it, and it's just like, oh, for Christ's sake! And the real dangerous thing about guys like him, he's super rich. He's not really going to experience life in the countryside of China ever, or life in Queens, or life in Anacostia. He's never going to see that. So the world will always be wonderful and luxurious to him, no matter who's in charge, until they
Right.
decide to get rid of him.
Well, Jeffrey Sachs is like the arch stereotype of a technocratic globalist, in my opinion.
Oh, totally. Oh, you know who's popping up a lot now too on Rumble as guests of like some of the influencers I mentioned is not only Max Blumenthal, but the LaRouche's. What is her name? The LaRouche organization, the Schiller Institute.
You told me about them. Oh, I know the Schiller Institute, but I think you told me about the LaRouche organization.
Oh my God, these people are. I mean, they became famous. I think I forgot the history of them, but they're not pro-China. These guys are literally like Mormon missionaries are to their church. I mean, these guys are like, everything about China is great. Everyone else sucks. Everyone should be China.
Oh yeah, I think Trevor Loudon also told me about that. I
Yeah,
can't
he would know
remember.
for sure. He would know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and so Sachs has been hosted by them, and see, that's the connection I'm coming up with. It sounds like you are too, but they all have the same, I'd say, geopolitical values. Like what all of the people we're talking about have in common is they are either pro or never say anything bad about Iran, China,
Russia,
Venezuela, and Russia ever, and Syria, and they always say the only 2 countries they attack are Israel and the United States, and they're calling themselves conservatives. So they're favoring communist authoritarian countries or theocracies over their own country. And really, you've been to Israel, of course.
Yeah, I lived there for a year.
I do see it as I went in there when I was in the military for joint type stuff, but I always see Israel as kind of like almost all of our same values in terms of freedom. And a lot of people have never been there, so they're just listening to.
It's so sad because
it's a beautiful country.
Christian conservatives especially don't realize that almost everything they would like to see in America, Israel has done, right? Strong family connections, people having lots of kids. Israel's the only country in the developed world where the birth rate is increasing.
Yeah.
And they have the strong religious identity, right? They're a democracy, but they're proudly Jewish in culture and orientation, right? So they have, and they're incredibly free, and that's why there's a microscope on them, and you can go and say whatever you want, right? Whereas journalists can't go into these neighboring countries and start criticizing the governments unless they're prepared to give their passports away first.
Even in the UAE, they will crack right down on you.
These are closed societies. Right. So Israel has it all. They have faith, they have family, they have freedom, which to me are pillars of conservatism in America.
Well, that is a good note to end on. I'm going to leave it right there. So Where do we find you? And I'd like you to come back next, because I didn't realize that you researched as much on China as you did. And I think the next conversation we have is, I'm looking at the Chinese Communist Party's play in a lot of these things.
I don't know if I feel so qualified to speak about China. The reason I feel so strongly about it is because
You have to be
I worked
qualified.
at Epoch Times for 3 years, so I just absorbed so much information from our reporters or the guests that Jan Jekielek, my boss, would have on his show. But I wouldn't say that I've sat down and done research about China. I've just been a student of Chinese history and the current Chinese political structure.
Academic. I'm certainly not. I mean, everything I know about China is just from reading, and mainly reading from the Chinese websites, the government
just
websites.
Listening to them.
Yeah, they actually, it's so funny, they don't actually hide what their intentions are. Right. And even people, conservatives, when I bring up China, they never talk about China. I'm like, you're worried about Israel, but you're not worried about China.
I know.
That's just...
No, I mean, we had Naomi when she wrote her last book. We had her on the show, and I remember loving that interview, and I sent it out because I learned a lot from her about Chinese influence in that interview. So Epoch just really does great work on that front. But yes, I'm happy to come back anytime, and thank you very much for.
Thank you for being here. I just want to say I didn't know Jan was your boss. He's a dear friend.
I was his producer. That's how I met Naomi.
Oh, that's awesome. So look, thank you so much for coming on. Sorry, we went a little bit over. I will get all of your information up that you want. And everyone, please do follow Miss Rhea's, Karys Rhea, at RHEAKARYS. And thank you so much for coming on, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, have a good night.
You too.
All right, everyone, I'm going to remove Karys from the stage and just finish up talking to you and taking your comments. Karys, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Okay, so while I got you guys here, that was a riveting conversation. I'm not going to read all the comments, but I'm happy to say that I don't see much hatred in here. That's great. Let's see what we got here. Okay, good. So we're going to start with this comment. Came in. He's probably still not here. When I have a guest on, I try to just focus on the conversation, but I always get to your comments. So this is Veiled Nomad. Great name. It is definitely in opposition to what real conservatives want. Yes, we're talking about, this kind of weird identitarianism. It absolutely is. And I think Karys is really, really forward-leaning in doing this research. It's very interesting. Thank you. Oh, hey, oh yeah, I need to check in with Sarande, because I know your husband, I believe, fiance, got out of jail on bail for the gun charge, but I do want to follow up with you, see how he's dealing with the Marxist courts here in Massachusetts. So I'll reach out to you, because I do want to get updates from you, but thanks for being on the show. All right. I voted for Trump, but I'm not hearing about his stolen election fantasy. But I'm done hearing about his stolen election fantasy. He lost by 7 million votes. Get over it. Pretending the 2020 election was stolen does nothing to help struggling Americans. Well, I agree with you. I think it's very important that we complete that investigation, so more elections aren't getting stolen. I do believe it was stolen, but that doesn't mean you got your opinion, I got mine. I would just say there's so many inconsistencies there. There's so much good evidence to say it was stolen. I'm sure there's a lot that says it wasn't, but most of the evidence that says it wasn't was controlled by the people that won, quote unquote. Like most of the judges favored the Democrats. So the fact that there were so many dead people voting, the fact that it kind of really resembled Brazil's last election in terms of inconsistencies and weird numbers. I think it's important that I respect your opinion, but I think it's important that that investigation is completed, so we can figure out what went on there, because hell, we could vote ourselves right into oblivion. I would refer you, Emerald Robinson actually did a piece today on the Manish show, where she was talking about new information coming out about Venezuela's involvement in the voting machines, which I found really interesting because I remember researching some of that. So I hear you, Julia, and I do love, it's a great name, at Julia Collins 777. It's a great username. But I see your point. Like, get the investigation going, right? And then you don't have to, you're right, you don't have to constantly say it, because let's keep people focused. But then again, look, the man's got his style. I do agree with you. I would rather see, more of a focus on things that he needs us to get behind. That is currently already underway. So I hear you. All right. Sounds like 5G warfare. Lots of bad actors, hard to keep everyone straight. Yeah, this is my story. It is. I would recommend you go to bandthebrotherhood.org, and you will basically be able to see, something called civilizational jihad, which is really weird, right? But basically, civilizational jihad is the way the Muslim Brotherhood is infiltrating our country, not with swords and scimitars and savagery, but by taking over universities, education programs, getting aligned with the existing churches, and then just taking them over. Go to bandthebrotherhood.org. There's some good informational stuff on there. So definitely recommend that one. And then let me see. Hit the thumbs up button. Thank you. We're watching a big shit show. Yes, we are watching a big shit show. But look, the important thing that I would say is don't buy. I'll post a link. I'd recommend you read it. But if you really want to be able to recognize messaging that's dangerous to this country, I would recommend just watching every single thing or reading every single thing you can about the 1917 Russian Revolution that led to the Soviet Union, but especially not the interpretations of it. Try to read the diaries and the speeches and everything. They lay it all out. Read the doctrine, read the Communist Manifesto, read as many of these things as you can. Don't listen to other people's interpretations of them. Read them for yourself. You'll start recognizing messaging in current politics. Because when I was listening to, for instance, Jackson Hinkle, I was like, this guy's pretty good. He's pretty articulate. I know he's a communist. But then he said one thing about like the parties aligning and everything. I said, man, that sounds familiar. And I was able to access my memory and say, oh, that was from Czechoslovakia during the, after the Soviets won control of that country. So it's a playbook that won. I mean, the communist playbook won. Lenin's playbook won. It got them the Soviet Union, and it was a pretty powerful place for a long time. It would make sense that this new generation of communists would just use the old manual, and they are. That's the crazy part about it. They literally are. If you go to my show, you'll see I did the commentator when I get into that, but maybe I want to get Alex Newman on here and have him really explain that. All right, thanks. And this is my story. Just like free speech and freedom to carry a firearm. Yeah, I love it. I love carrying my firearm. It's great. I don't always get to carry it, but when I'm in the right state, I do. So I hear you. Well, guys, that is it for us tonight. And I will just say goodbye. But don't forget to check out also our sponsors. For instance, Gold is one of our, one of the sponsors we push the most. And it's because my biggest reason for pushing it is because China is buying up gold. Okay, so get your free booklet. You're going to go to cloutgold.com. And this is one of our sponsors, but you want to get the booklet that shows the indicators. Because remember, when people hoard gold, there tend to be a lot of wars that follow that. And right now, China's hoarding gold. You know what's going on in Venezuela. So check it out. This is our sponsor. I will say what's great about these guys is they never, ever blow up your phone. Like, you're going to get good information. I highly recommend getting something into either gold or silver. They carry both. But just download your book today at cloutgold.com, and you'll learn more. And let me know what you think, and we can have a whole discussion on gold. I could talk about gold forever. It's so fascinating, the way gold is involved in every major geopolitical shift, which makes it kind of easy to invest in because you know which way gold's going to go based on what's going on in the country or in the world. So just keep that in mind. And then that is it for now. So I will, don't forget to go ahead, sign up for my Substack, follow me on X. If you mention the show, I'll follow you back. And don't forget to follow Karys as well. Very interesting stuff going on. So look, I appreciate you all coming out. I'm going to wrap it up. We're going to end it there, and I will talk to you soon. So don't forget, and she made a good point, if someone says something about any religion saying this or any religion saying that, don't quote it until you research it, because there's nothing, at a minimum amount of damage is you're going to look like a dumbass at the next party. You're going to say, well, did you know that the blah, blah, blah in Sri Lanka, like in American Psycho. But the most dangerous part of that is you could be inadvertently spreading the message of our own enemies that's incorrect. And she had mentioned the false Talmudic phrases. I didn't even think of that. Just drop it into ChatGPT. Is this really from the Talmud? Is this really from the Quran? Is this really from the Old Testament? I'm kind of a bad Catholic. I don't really know my Bible that well, so I have to do that all the time. So yeah, and I say that because with that, I'm going to say just make sure you investigate everything. Thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. Have a great night.